Munto was more than frustrated. As it turned out, the standard medical scanner was only 10% larger than was needed for a standard galactic-sized organic. Given the substantially larger alleged Terran rigs, Munto had to recycle the scanner for a larger template, normally used by non-sentient animal organic medicine, something rigs called a vet. Munto tried to search on this term, but wasn't certain how it applied to survivors or former active participants of warfare, a concept that they and most Tassets found to be truly abhorrent. What made it worse was that the Terran didn't seem to have an alternative definition that fit within the known database lexicon. And Rix was still ungarbed, despite the complications with the medical scanner and Munto's suggestion that the physical did not require clothing removal. Nah, every physical I've ever had, the most I've had was a basic paper sheet. I don't figure you've got one of those laying around, and it wouldn't matter about printing one up since it's just you and me here, Rix has said. The only problem was that the larger medical scanner would require the Terran to help set it up, and it would take up a substantial subsection of the room. Munto tried not to think about it too hard. Munto focused instead on talking with the Terran, their data queries regarding the TCC having come back. Regarding your query regarding the conflict between the TSC and the TCC, Munto started, and Rix perked up substantially. It appears that the conflict was in fact ended by a third party. Rix's face appeared to screw up in confusion. The Flicks? Or was it somebody else? He prompted, appearing to be trying to think through his knowledge of the time. According to the records, which are a bit haphazardly filed, it appears that a kind of mutual defense pad was activated, and an organization by the name of Terrasol Federation sided with the Flicks and some 4 other organizations at the time, and shortly afterwards your TSC and the TCC entered into the alliance, effectively ending the conflict, although for reasons that aren't apparent, Munto said, running virtual appendages through the files again. Rick sat in quiet contemplation for a long while, appearing to take this news rather differently than Munto had come to expect in the short term in knowing the alleged Terran. I always figured those TSFs were out of their grip when it came to spacefaring. They must have hit upon something to make it possible, though, was Rix's eventual comment on it. Are you feeling particular emotions over this? Munto asked. Yes, but I'd probably need to talk them through with a head doc. Do they still have those? Rick seemed to pivot on subjects so quickly that it made Munto's circuit skip a pulse. Psychological medicine is available for most organics, and is considered to be a common best practice in mental well-being, Munto said, reading almost directly from a top-level database about organics. That's good to know that not everything has changed then. Rix appeared to relax, but was still thinking. Munto checked the printer that was in the process of augmenting the walking frame with Terran-grade ocular sensors, a spectrum that seemed horribly inefficient for what it did, as well as the printer working on the VET medical scanner. The first was at 23%, and the other was at 79.2%. Strangely, the ocular sensors were taking substantially longer because of an unexpected level of complexity. So, what happened with the TSF then? And what's this Galactic Society you mentioned? Did we find aliens? Rix asked, drawing Munto's attention. The TSF and Associated Alliance was dissolved some 50 years later in favour of the Galactic Council, an organisation which became the foundation of modern galactic society. Naturally, it has changed substantially since it was first founded, though. As to your other question, Galactic Society is not Terran-centric anymore, it involving no less than 750 distinct sentients, all of whom are some mix of organic, inorganic, or some equivalent distinction, Munto said, flipping between data files and watching the percentages slowly creep up. Why no less than? Rick seemed to have caught the worst part of that statement, because Munto then had to go looking quickly for the answer. It took less than a second, but it was still annoying to have to look. Why couldn't this alleged Terran ask about planets and stars? Because the level of sentience is an eternal subject for debate within the Galactic Council. There are those who argue for one measure of sentience versus another, and to cover the associated species accordingly, Munto quoted, from the TacitNet page again, before simultaneously posting back to the criteria post that the larger medical scanner was necessary to fit the being in question. The responses seemed incredulous as to the organic being that large, while still displaying obvious sentience. Further responses indicated that this would still be well within the bell curve baseline for Terrans. Oh, well, I suppose that makes sense. What do you think about those debates? Which side do you take? Rix asked.
I do not take sides in this. Those are the affairs of galactic society. While Tassets are a part of galactic society, we are a wholly neutral body, provided we are respected accordingly, Munto said affirmatively.
Rix appeared to consider this for a moment. So you're like those Centurions. Never could stand them, Rix said, a semi-serious look on his face. Munto debated, looking up the reference, but decided easiest to make the Terran explain themselves. Please explain the context of that statement, Munto prompted. Oh, always playing the we're neutral card regardless of what's happening. A war happens, somebody gene bombs a colony, somebody else goes on a piracy campaign, doesn't matter. Just constantly playing the we're neutral. Really quickly turns into the as long as it doesn't affect us, we don't care after a while. Even though they clearly should care, Rix explained, in the longest statement he'd made in the last few hours. Munto considered this as well as the logical evidence the Tassets maintained regarding it. There was nothing inviolate about it, but based on the Terran's perspective, it did make sense that Tassets should intervene where possible. And it is entirely possible that Tassets had, especially those involved in negotiations between hostile parties. Would you object to having wholly neutral parties in negotiations, ones that cannot be bought off or biased for or against you? Munto tried. Depends on what the negotiations are about. If it's something like a planet, sure. If it's about the rights of beings, absolutely not. There are some things you don't compromise on, Rix almost spat out. It was clear this was a socially sensitive item for Rix, and so Munto decided to steer the conversation away from it. But to answer your question from earlier, yes, Terrans did locate sentient xenospecies and coordinated to elevate them to an equivalent technology level before continuing out into the galaxy to continue to do the same, Munto suggested. Really? No issues with local society development? Just bang, here's some tech now, get into the stars? Rix asked. It was a bit more intensive than that, or so I'm given to understand, Munto said, having glossed over that part of the general database during their formulation. There usually is. I'm surprised we managed a first contact without a war, if I'm honest, Rix said. That particular first contact was peaceful. Several subsequent first contacts were not, and did in fact result in armed conflicts. It was out of those conflicts that the Tassets were first designed, Munto said, having the abbreviated history of the origin of Tassets. Then I guess it makes sense that you're massive intelligences. How big was the first Tasset? I bet it was bigger than a cruiser-class vessel. Rix pivoted again, making the circuit seem to grind at the rapid direction shift again. It took Munto a moment to check the TSC database for cruiser-class vessels, and was confronted with an almost disturbingly large vessel. It outmassed Munto by several orders of magnitude, and was clearly a vessel intended for warfare. The amount of weaponry the basic cruiser class maintained was enough to take and hold the average galactic star system. It seemed to practically be a mobile station unto itself. What made it worse was that there were annotations to the file to suggest that the majority of cruiser-class vessels operated by the TSC were retrofitted with additional and more expansive weaponry. The level of savagery being displayed in the mere knowledge of the vessel was almost primal and terrifying. Munto mentally looked between the stack of data and the Terran sitting ungarbled next to the still printing medical scanner, 95%. Reluctantly, Munto did compare the general specifications on mass and general configuration of the first Tasset with a cruiser class of the TSC. It was almost a perfect match. Munto dug in and started looking for more data, even making requests on TassetNet for first Tasset construction configuration. They received an almost instant data file, since it was akin to asking for the atomic mass of helium to 20 decimal places. Munto started doing a heavier comparison between the two. Where a multitude of weapons arrays had been, the first thinking arrays had been installed. Where a dropship storage had been, a new power core to sustain the thinking arrays had been installed. It seemed almost gross to contemplate that the Tassets had been born from such a crude implementation, but here it was. Further spare components intended for vast storages of weaponry and personnel had been converted for the various mechanisms to support a Tasset. Sensor arrays had been added, the already prodigious sensor arrays being converted to support the new and varied sensors needed, and now commonplace within the Tasset, although Munto hadn't ever wholly understood why. Bing! An internal chime sounded to Munto, and they noted that the medical scanner was complete. Rix,
Please remove the completed scanner from the printer and assist in assembling it, Munto requested.
Sure thing, Doc. By the way, what do you want me to call you? I know you said your name was Munto with some numbers, but what do I call you? Rick said, standing and stepping up to the printer in little more than 2 strides.
Munto considered this a moment. Having not had a lot of experience with organics, primarily by choice, and a lot more experience with just tacits and planets and stars, it just had never come up. It never really mattered. The thought that it hadn't mattered previously bothered Munto for some reason, spawning threats that didn't make sense. Munto allowed them to persist for a few minutes before killing them. In the meantime, Munto answered. Munto is a reasonable shortening. I have no other names. The numeric designation is in relation to the production facility in which I was formulated, Munto responded.
Good enough, I guess. I'll just have to think up a nickname for you then, Rick said, a tight grin on his face. Is this Flatpack?
It took Munto a moment to realize that Terran was referring to the medical kit. Yes, I can use the walking frame to assist you, or I can direct you into how it is to be assembled, Munto said, checking on the augmentation status, 29%.
I'm pretty good at doing it yourself, as long as it isn't too delicate. They wouldn't let me be on the ship by myself if I wasn't capable of putting the odd bits together. Rick continued smiling.
Very well, let's begin, Munto said.
Over the course of the following hour, the Terran had managed to bend several pieces, which should not have been able to bend, at least by galactic standards, and so tools had been required to be printed to straighten the items. It was immensely frustrating for Munto, as they were able to have done it themselves, had the walking frame been available in a fraction of the time. But, Munto reflected, it had been a good exercise in demonstrating the alleged Terran's capabilities of biometrics, even if it was somewhat at the expense of the medical scanner.
Oh well, it only has to work once, thought Munto, looking at the assembled unit and considering the level of construction that the Terran had managed. Please enter the scanner and hold still for approximately 30 seconds. Please respirate and circulate normally while within the scanner, Munto directed Rix.
Wait, is that something species can do? Stop their circulation? Rix almost immediately asked, stepping between 2 of the poles that supported the device.
Yes, please do not do that, as it could complicate the biometric readings.
Munto was determined to get the criteria fulfilled, and answered, as to whether this was a Terran or not. Sure thing, Munto. Rix stood in the middle and waited patiently.
Munto triggered the scanner and waited. The first scans came in and revealed a lot of what Munto already knew. Rix was an organic, was exothermic, possessed an internal skeletal structure of some sort, and had grasping appendages which were capable of supporting the body to which they were attached. Further scans revealed more about the internal skeletal structure, along with the internal musculature. The word overbuilt came back to Munto's conscious mind. The scans completed, and Munto was already trying to process all of it at once. It wasn't helping.
So, are you done? Rix asked, seeming to jerk Munto out of the stack of data. I only ask as I'm a little cold, and I'd still like to see about getting something to eat.
I believe I am finished with the scan. Please guard and break down the medical scanner. I should have some results shortly on compatible foods that I can produce, Munto said, eager to get back to the data. It looked worse the longer Munto looked. Of the criteria so far, the only thing the Terran hadn't demonstrated was percussive maintenance. A fraction of a second later, Rix appeared to hit a joint to the medical scanner to help separate it into component pieces. It was just as bad as Munto was considering. Rix, of the Terran Star Confederacy, was in fact a Terran, and was almost certainly the last Terran. Munto tried to consider what this would mean, and kept finding themselves at dead ends of thought paths. It wasn't helpful to keep thinking on this. After all, the rest of the TASIS were waiting to hear back. Munto uploaded the complicated criteria and the scans taken to the page with the marker Terran confirmed according to stated criteria. From there, Munto started looking at compatible foods, focusing on simple foods that were mostly likely of some long-ago Terran origin. And for the first time in a long while, Munto felt almost excited. It wasn't a star or strange planetoid or even a peculiar comet, but this was a mystery that definitely needed solving.